one council member would come in frequently, which probably became all too frequently, in my opinion, after a while, because every time they came in, they were saying, I think you should resign. I think you should resign. They always ended, I think you should resign.
You are listening to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. Twice each month, Greg and Jay Goodshow draw on their combined 80-plus years of state and local government work experience to help listeners avoid the pitfalls they and others have unwittingly stumbled into. And now, on to the episode.
Welcome to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned, Episode 3. This morning we'll be talking about avoiding personal agendas, and just as a little bit of a lead into that, talking about the impact of both municipal managers and elected officials' efforts to implement personal agendas and what some of the pitfalls may be with that. This is Jay Goodshow, and on the other end is my brother Greg Goodshow. What I wanted to start with, too, and I've said in our previous episodes, talking about my experience, working for the state of Michigan, and then, of course, jumping into working as a municipal manager in several municipalities. So I'm going to be talking about experiences in both of those positions. But just to give some background, as we get into some of the motivation for people deciding to be municipal managers or deciding to be elected officials, I thought it would be interesting to kind of review some old concepts. Many of us have heard the expression, the Peter Principle, and just in a nutshell, that is defined as a person rising to their level of incompetence. So that kind of talks about, you apply for promotions or what have you, and work up to a point. Oftentimes people work up to a point to where they are not particularly proficient at that particular level. Well, in my experience working with the state of Michigan, they would go through a periodic contraction with the budget, just based on revenue and juggling different funding sources for various programs. So periodically they would decide, the state of Michigan would decide they had too many employees, so they would offer early retirement incentives and what have you. And in one particular instance, they estimated how many thousands of people were going to accept the incentives, and it turned out that there were 3 times that number actually jumped off of their jobs, I guess, with the state of Michigan early. So it left this tremendous void, especially in upper level management, because those were the people that had been with the state generally for the longest period of time and were eligible to retire. So in this particular instance, the expression, the bozo explosion, seemed to fit that bill, and
which seems to disparage clowns universally, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, and I think Bozo was probably a great clown, but it's just the image I think they're trying to portray with that. And oddly enough, I had a boss at one point that behind his back we referred to him as Bozo. Had a lot to do with his hairstyle. Anyway, I won't say much more than that. But
he didn't wear a red nose and have the white makeup on, and
he did not need to. Anyway, but he was the epitome of this bozo explosion. So basically, unlike the Peter Principle, where you rise one level above your level of incompetence, because of this huge void with upper level management, people oftentimes were appointed to positions 2 or more levels above their level of incompetence. Mm-hmm. So that's where that came into being. And using that other illustration just to kind of give you a little hint of of this personality that was involved in his first 2 weeks, probably as the head of our agency. People thought that he was just really angry with everybody all the time. He was sending out a lot of emails. He was kind of the master of delegation, so there was a lot of emails going out, but everybody thought he was angry because he sent all these emails out with capital letters. And finally, after 2 weeks, somebody said something to him, and he had no idea where the caps lock button was on his keyboard. Anyway, so we knew
he hadn't bothered to take the time to try and figure it out so that he wasn't, using shouting in his emails. Huh?
No, exactly. So there's a commercial on TV where that's an illustration, and I thought, boy, this is reminiscent here. So anyway, but that was telling, very telling, as far as what we were going to be experiencing in the next few years of his being in charge. So,
well, Jay, before we go on, I think we really want to be clear here. You obviously went through a number of times where they had these early retirement incentives and whatever. I think the listeners are likely to wonder: is that how you gained promotion? Was as a result of were you part of the? Let's be frank here and let's be honest with people. Were you part of the Bozo explosion?
I was not. It seems unlikely, but in my 32 years of experience, I had one promotion during that period of time, and it was.
No, I know you. That doesn't seem odd at all to me.
It was no, that's true because I kind of get entrenched in a position, So it's not for the lack of trying, but what I discovered is that I was not very good at telling people what they wanted to hear during interviews.
Oh,
so
that doesn't surprise me either.
So I kind of learned my lesson, but it just took a long time to realize that. But in this particular instance, I was working directly for Bozo, as it were, and as I said, he was very good at delegating, and it brought up this expression that has been attributed to Shakespeare. Where a person is a jack of all trades and a master of none, and that's a paraphrase apparently. So in his particular case, he was a master delegator, but a master of none. So anyway, but interesting thing about that expression, Jay, and that is the actual expression is to be referring to somebody as a jack of all trades. The way it goes is a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Correct.
And so, this I think is particularly relevant to those of us who are in municipal government because we do have a wide range of areas that we have to be responsible for. So, shortening that up really oftentimes betrays what the real meaning of that was.
No, and I understand that, and that's, I think probably a subject of a future episode we can get into, what is behind municipal managers' decisions when they look at where they want to consider, applying or accepting an assignment. We all look for, that particular niche, and that's something that I think we can get into. I think looking at, in my particular case, I specifically looked for smaller communities versus larger communities, and there's a vast difference. So we can, obviously, there's probably take a lot more time than we'll have with this particular episode. So we'll kind of park that thought and come back to that in a future episode. But in talking about the Peter Principle and the Bozo explosion, you might ask, what does this have to do with municipal management?
What does this have to do with municipal management anyway? How is this applicable to those of us that went into city management as a career?
Well, I was going to say it has nothing to do with municipal management.
Oh, all right.
So there's just an interesting little analogy, but no, it does in a sense. It isn't the same as what I experienced working for state government, but in my observation, I have seen municipal managers that have, I'm not sure what their rationale was for looking at this particular career, but what their vision was for the position. And I've seen managers who put their feet up on the desk and waited for business to come to them, where in my experience working in communities, I was never at a loss for something to do. I mean, you could, every day was different. There was something to be done at all times. There was certainly no time to put your feet up and relax necessarily. In the case of other managers, when you get into this personal agenda, I knew of one manager who, whether it was stated or unstated, but when the municipality kind of delved into some of his actions, he had in his mind he wanted to square off the city limits. So he wanted a perfect square or rectangle. He didn't want all these little jogs along property lines or whatever that, because I don't know of any, I want to say I don't know of any, I know of very few municipalities who have, a nice even rectangle that they call their boundaries anyway. But that was his particular agenda, and all it did was resulted in irritating the surrounding townships as they tried to annex properties, So, and ultimately resulted in his departure from that municipality. In another instance, I heard of a candidate who, during their interview with the council, and I don't think it was prompted by a question. I mean, certainly if council asks you this particular question, it'd probably be okay to answer it. But he was given an opportunity, I guess, to make some observations. Well, his observations included going over a laundry list of everything he saw wrong in the community. and expounding on that during their interview. And I don't think that's a good tactic to use in an interview, certainly, and the candidate wasn't selected as a result. In my experience, elected officials and the public in general like to see their own community sort of as the center of the universe. They care about what's going on, outside of their communities and the surrounding, communities, or in their state, or in the country, or the world for that matter. But you have to really consider that what's important to them is their local community. So,
sure. Jay, one of the things that occurs to me as you're talking about these interview situations in particular, you have individuals who may be coming into positions like that, and particularly if you're familiar, as we have in Michigan, a lot of smaller units of government. You may very well have people who are applying for manager positions who have a frame of reference that's not a lot different than any other member of the public. And so they don't have a lot of experience that allows them to understand some of the nuances of working in a council manager system, and how those, how comments about the municipality and the culture of the municipality, may be unique to that place, and be one that everyone there is very comfortable with. They don't have a way of they don't have that larger context within which to consider that. And so I think that really does tend to support a little bit, maybe not the bozo explosion, but that sometimes you see in people who are moving up in positions, they don't know all they need to know before they're being considered for a position. What happens with managers is it's a very public interview situation, and as a consequence, those statements that would otherwise happen behind closed doors are happening out there, where the public and the news media and certainly the people that are going to employ them and work with them are all able to see that particular weakness in their background.
Well, and the other thing too is given some latitude for the elected officials that are conducting the interviews, they have a limited amount of time, oftentimes less than 2 hours, certainly, to evaluate whether a candidate has the right personality for their municipality.
Correct.
And I think that the personality is really critical. I mean, certainly your education and experience are important, but personality making that that particular fit, for the community. So,
well, absolutely, and I think that's an entirely legitimate perspective for councils to bring to that interview process with managers. If you've made it to the interview, the chances are you have the education and prior experience that has, you've checked those boxes on the list where either the council or the search consultant have already evaluated and determined that, you meet that threshold. Then you're really talking about some soft skills, including, how are you going to relate to members of the public, to the staff, to the council? How do you come across? It's all that fit within the culture. That's a conversation I've had on a number of occasions with department heads when they've been hiring. You hire first for fit, as long as somebody has the minimum qualifications and they're teachable. The rest of it they can learn, but they're unlikely to learn the fit if they come in and they are going to be a fish out of water.
Right, and that's exactly right. And then to kind of consider, elected officials, I've experienced a number of situations where people were motivated to run for public office in the local municipalities because there was a particular issue that upset them, for instance, and not that they really had the best interest of the community in mind necessarily. So they find themselves, running on the basis that, a change is needed and they happen to get elected, but they might have a particular agenda item. One instance I can think of, this person who was elected, I think their motivation in large part was due to the fact that they had a dispute with the municipality over their water and sewer bill and how they thought it should have been calculated, and they wanted to, their thinking was is they could get on council and somehow manipulate that to their advantage. And it's resulted in a lot of angst between council members in this particular instance, and it hasn't changed anything. I mean, the utility rates have been verified by having a significant rate study done a couple of years prior to that. So there was a justification for what the rates needed to be and what everybody else was paying. And in this particular instance, they appealed to the Utility Review Board, and the Utility Review Board declined to take any action on their request, basically, other than to listen to their rationale on it. But now the person's an elected official, and they found themselves, I think, largely unprepared for some of the other issues that you have to deal with. I mean, being an elected official, you aren't dealing with just that one particular issue. You're dealing with a whole host of items.
Right.
So,
right.
And you have to cultivate support among other council members.
Yeah, but there's also an obligation, I think, on the part of managers to understand what the motivations of council members are and to try and educate them as to the broader role that they have there. I've certainly had council members who've come onto councils who came in as single issue or limited issue candidates that, I still had to sit down and do the same orientation with them that I did for any council member. I think in all the years that I did orientations for council, offered orientations for newly elected council members, I only had one instance in which a council member refused to come in for that meeting, and he only lasted for a couple of years on the council. The rest of them, and it varied in terms of what they were going to pick up from that. But I think we do have an obligation as managers with new council members to give them a little bit better understanding and help them be more effective in their job. And the reason there's a stake we have in them becoming better council members, which is that otherwise they're going to find their time frustrating, and they will carry out that frustration with actions or behaviors or issues that are not constructive. And I think that broadening out their personal agendas, I think, can help to overcome that.
We'll return to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned in a moment. Do you have a topic you would like Greg and Jay to explore? Are you interested in being a guest on Lessons Learned? Do you have comments about this episode? You can write Greg and Jay using the contact form at gregllc.com/lessons. That's GREGGLLC.com/lessons.
All of these things have an impact on the manager's decision on the length of their tenure, I guess, too.
Yeah.
If they feel like I always try to do the same thing, invite council members to come in and see me whenever they need to, and to try to provide some guidance, education, answer their questions, and all of that. So it wasn't always successful. I remember in one particular instance, I was always curious as to what the vote was when they offered me the position, and I don't think I ever knew that. But this one council member would come in frequently, which probably became all too frequently, in my opinion, after a while, because every time they came in, they were saying, "I think you should resign. I think you should resign." They always ended, "I think you should resign," and I'd say, "What's behind this?" And
Yeah.
I never could get any concrete ideas from them. In fact, I went so far as at one point I said, "Have you discussed this with your other fellow council members?" "Well, no, why would I do that?" Well, if you have 7 votes, it's going to take 4 to end,
Right.
end my contract. But I didn't explain it that way. But I mean, that was what I was thinking. But it went through that particular assignment with that little bit of a gray cloud, I guess. I didn't let it bother me in particular, but you always wondered, what's the motivation behind that. But
Well, and again, that's a part of the unknowns. I think that people who do come into the management profession think that all that's required is to be competent and do a good job, and they don't understand necessarily the politics that they're going to find and the personalities that they'll be dealing with. And
Right.
I had one council member in particular in my career who was not good at consensus building. And I think he found his time on council very frustrating. He'd come from a business background. He was accustomed to giving orders and having people follow orders, and he didn't understand. He thought that if he said something and it was a good idea, that everybody was going to fall in line, and that was all it was going to take. And he had his personality was one that rubbed people the wrong way. And when I first started working with him, I found he could push my buttons fairly easily, and then discovered, oh, wait a minute, that's his strategy. That's how he gains an upper hand. And once I realized that, then it didn't work anymore. And I ended up with a good relationship with him. He was a fine council member, but it took him a while to understand the dynamics of working in that kind of an environment. If they come on, they have their agendas, and if they don't have the skill set necessary to work in that kind of a collaborative way, that can be a frustration for them. A part of what I do when I did and continue to do in talking with councils is to emphasize what those skills are that will help make them effective. And clearly working collaboratively with others and building consensus gets you a long way. I interviewed once for as an interim position many years ago, and it was a council member who's right at the end of his time on council, had served for, I think, 4 years, and he had found his time on the council to be very, very frustrating. He felt that he would have had a better opportunity if I had been there to work with during that period of time, but that's not the experience he had had. He didn't know, he went away feeling very dissatisfied with the time, and he was a very competent individual, but he felt very dissatisfied with his experience on council.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. In all my assignments, there were certain council members that would come in the office and meet with me, and had questions, or just to come in, just to stop in sometimes, just to say hi or whatever. But there were always council members that you rarely saw outside of a council meeting. You would invite them to come in, and then they would get into council meetings sometimes, and they would ask questions that had already been addressed, or had gone out and, I always tried to give some summary of agenda items, what have you. It was obvious that they hadn't read the agenda items at all, so they would have been wise to come in, even if they didn't read the packet, it would be wise to come in and talk with the manager and have a little bit more of an understanding of what what all these documents were about, what the issue was about, and the pros and cons and what have you, instead of struggling through the council meeting.
Yeah.
And I can think of in one particular instance, we had a couple of council members that decided that the village should never have any cash reserves at the end of the year, that if there was any money left over, it should be returned to the taxpayers. You couldn't, there was no need for a rainy day fund. And I tried to educate them repeatedly about that's not a healthy way to budget, certainly. And they ended up ultimately resigning, from the council. But and part of that was because there were two people out of the seven that couldn't agree on a budget or whatever, but the budget still got passed by the other five members.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Jay, what this has been a fairly wide-ranging discussion.
Yes.
Maybe more so than you originally anticipated when you led this off, because I kept interrupting you.
That's okay. This is supposed to be dialogue, and that's what.
Is
that's
that what
about.
it is? We've always done this. We've habitually interrupted one another throughout our entire lives. That's just the way we've talked. You have to when either you or I we have to have a clear sense of where we're going, because we always end up in tangents that we never intended to go on. But as we're looking to kind of a few minutes we have left here, what are some of the lessons that you think are the most important to learn out of this wide-ranging discussion?
Certainly the keeping pathways for discussion, for conversation open, with your elected officials, but also keeping the pathways open with fellow municipal managers. I think that's really critical, and I know of managers that you don't see at I think I've said this before. You don't see them at conventions and regional meetings and what have you. And I always question, well, why is that? Because not only do they have something that they could glean from those those discussions and conversations, but they also have something they could share with other managers who have less experience or less experience in a particular situation. So I strongly encourage that for managers, no matter what their tenure is.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that there's always opportunities for all of us to learn. As long as I've been doing this, the 40 years that I've been a city manager, there's still something in every municipality that I go to as an interim manager, for example, where I'm learning something that I didn't know before. They're doing something that is either unique to them in terms of a service that they have, or a way in which they go about doing things that is unique that I've not had prior personal experience with. And that's certainly the case in all the many local governments that we have in Michigan, small and large alike, that there are interesting variations on what's going on, and it's always something that you can pick up from a colleague. And I think that also among the challenges we face, and you certainly highlighted this, that challenge of working with elected officials is one that there's always something new to learn. There's always somebody that's seeing something different. And particularly when there are maybe things that are going on in the larger society that are giving rise to different types of individuals who are coming onto those council roles, who may come in with a political agenda that we're not accustomed to seeing, particularly those of us that have worked in nonpartisan governments with nonpartisan elections. Those are things that I think are very useful for us to have some sensitivity to, so that if we see it in our roles, then we have some frame of reference for that.
Well, and if, as you could probably speak to this better than I can, as far as municipal management goes, but over the course of time, you've seen conditions evolve. Whether it's coming down from the federal and state level to us, and what impact that has on the smaller, the local communities. But conditions just change, and the one that's probably most familiar right now is what happened in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. That threw everybody for a loop, because we didn't know what it was and how long it was going to last and what kind of precautions you have to take. And
Correct.
Many of us worked remotely for a period of time, and then we also faced issues with an invasion of somebody's rights to not wear
Right.
face covering when they come into public office. And I certainly had challenges with people coming in and intentionally recording initiating confrontation and then recording it to post on the internet or whatever. So there's I don't think there's a manual that tells you how to deal with those particular situations.
No. Although what I've commented about that is that we were all thrust into that overnight, essentially. But many of us adapted very, very well and very, very quickly to that. And I think that that's really a testament to the competence of a lot of people who are in these roles, particularly the professionals, to say, we can figure this out, and we know what the issues are. We'll come up with some creative solutions. And the challenge that we now face is that we have demonstrated to the public that we can be far more responsive than we might have been before, and they're not willing to give that up. Now, even though the pandemic is officially over, there's that expectation that we've created that we can be far more responsive, perhaps, than we even thought possible before, and find some creative ways to deliver services and be in contact with the public, and basically provide 24-hour-a-day government, in essence, because we can handle so many things remotely that we didn't do before.
Right, and in some cases, that change has occurred, and we won't ever go back to the way things were before in some respects. Maybe not so much in our profession, but with other professions.
In just a second here, I did want to mention before we do conclude here that today's episode is sponsored by the Mutton Chops and Mullets Festival, held each May in Muskellunge, Minnesota. The festival is a fundraiser for the Muskellunge Area Alliteration and Assonance Association, or MA. They use the proceeds to send 2 Cullen County Consolidated School students to poetry camp each summer. Check MA's website for dates of the 2024 festival and start growing out your hair and whiskers. Jay, I think that we ought to plan to maybe try and make a trip out there to see that, although I don't think I'm capable of growing mutton chops, and I really don't want a mullet. But we are appreciative of that sponsor, and we'll be looking for other sponsor opportunities as we go along here. Next episode, we're going to be talking about handling anonymous complaints. With that, I think we're going to wrap up. Have a great day, Jay.
All right, thank you as well.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Manager Brothers Lessons Learned is a production of Greg Guidance, LLC, a multi-specialty consulting firm offering interim management, group process facilitation, workflow analysis, operational studies, and more to local governments in Michigan and beyond.